Good morning, this is Kris Shoemaker, also known as Yehudah ben Shomeyr, and you're listening to Coffee with Kris, the time of the day where we share a cup of coffee and share a bit of the Word of God. All right, we're wrapping up our week with a Friday-Saturday Aliyah Sidra of this Torah portion of Re'eh, which means to see, and is taken from Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 1, all the way to chapter 16, verse 17. But we're only going to read the first 3 verses of chapter 13. Now, we've heard this before. This has been in other parts and portions of the Torah. This has been in Leviticus 23, for example. It's been in Numbers and been in Exodus and been in other places. But let's read it again and try to get a new perspective on this. It says, "Observe the month of Aviv and keep the Pesach, keep the Passover to Adonai your God. For in the month of Aviv, Adonai your God brought you out of Egypt at night. You are to sacrifice the Pesach offering from the flock and the herd to Adonai your God in the place where Adonai will choose to have his name live. You are not to eat chametz, that is leaven, yeast, with it. For 7 days you are to eat it with matzah, that is unleavened bread, the bread of affliction. For you came out of the land of Egypt in haste. Thus you will remember the day you left the land of Egypt as long as you live." All right, let's pump the brakes here. What's different about this passage than the other passages that are dealing with the Passover? The difference is Moses is addressing the second generation of Israelites that came out of Egypt. They were not born when they left Egypt. They were not born when the death angel came and wiped out all the firstborn. They were not there for all the plagues, the 10 plagues, and they weren't there from the Exodus from Egypt. They heard about it, they heard stories about it, but they didn't live it, so it's not in their conscious living memory. It's not like they can go back and relive this. They have to imagine it from the stories given by their elders. But here Moses is saying, if your parents left Egypt, you were genetically in your parents, so you left Egypt too, even though you weren't born. Just as it says about Abraham that when he gave a tithe to Melchizedek, that Levi was inside him and gave a tithe, and Levi was the priest who received tithes, right? So it's kind of the same principle here. So basically, the important thing about this Sidra, this Aliyah, this Torah portion for today, is to remember your roots. Remember where you came from. Those who forget where they came from, those who forget their origins, those who forget their roots, go off track. They get loony. For instance, movie stars, musicians who came from the ghetto, who came from poverty, and now they're rich and they're bankrupt because they blew all their money. They lost who they are. They got snobbish. They didn't stay humble because they thought, hey, I'm the best, I'm the greatest, I'm all that because I've achieved this. You're scum because you haven't. They forgot their roots. They forgot where they came from. Humility is key. Humility will get you far. Humility is not weakness, but humility is power under control. And it's important to remember, not just think about and remember, but to have some sort of memorial, some sort of reenactment to remember, to keep your origins and roots fresh in your mind, to keep you humble, to keep you on track, to keep you serving God. Passover is just one of these things. Why do we have Civil War reenactments? One of the reasons is to remember we weren't there. We just heard stories and read things in history books, but we reenact it to remember that time. Why? Because those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. If we remember the Civil War, we'll be less likely to have another Civil War as a result. And so it's less likely that we're going to fall into sin or stray away from the Lord if we keep his commandments and keep the festivals and the feasts that he set up for us, because they are remembrances of our roots, remembrances of where we came from, remembrance of our relationship with God, and it keeps us rooted, it keeps us grounded, and it helps us not to go off into crazy land. So that's why Passover and the feast of Leviticus 23 and here Deuteronomy chapter 16 is important for every believer. Because even though you may not have been born Hebrew or Israeli or Jewish, you are grafted in. So these feasts are not Jewish feasts. There's nowhere in the Bible that says these are Jewish feasts. It says these are the feasts of the Lord. So if they're the Lord's feast, that means they're your feast. If it's their history, it means it's your history because you've been grafted in. And it does you well, and it blesses you, and does good for you to participate in these things and be reminded of these things. Because it draws you closer to the Lord, and when you obey the Lord and you keep the feast, only blessing can result from that. Guys, thanks so much for listening. Go out there and have a great day. Shalom, and God bless.